Hey, yeah, you, the one they said wasn't supposed to make it out alive. Tell me, how's it feel to be the reason they're redacting entire chapters from the playbook they wrote to trap you? They didn't expect this ending. Hell, they didn't expect a second act. You were supposed to go down in scene 1, a statistic, a whisper, a malfunction. But somehow you became the anomaly they can't unsee. A walking, breathing breach in their system. And now they're not closing the case. They're covering the explosion. They thought justice was a game you'd lose in silence. But you didn't play the game. You incinerated the FC board. You weren't meant to win, let alone dominate so hard they had to stop the simulation, call a meeting, and ask who the hell authorized this outcome. And the best part, no one can explain it. Not the experts, not the analysts, not the federal leeches sniffing your trail with their little clipboards and crooked neckties. Because you didn't just escape, you rewrote your goddamn fate mid-sentence. And they're terrified of that. You see, they planned for everything except you breaking the algorithm from the inside. They stitched your downfall into policy, drafted your surrender into law, even predicted the date you'd beg for mercy. But instead, you made the lawyer cry. You made the jury twitch. You made the judges stare at your file like it was a ghost story. And now they're whispering behind closed doors, reprogramming the AI, scrubbing the archives because your wind doesn't make sense on paper. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a loophole. It was war. And you brought fire to the courthouse. You know what they hate most? That you didn't ask. You didn't beg. You didn't plead. You didn't negotiate your worth on their cold granite floors. You walked in already holding the verdict. Like a force of nature they forgot to outlaw. And when they pulled their files, nothing added up. No motive, no means, no normality. Just this haunting grin carved into reality. Like you were saying, go ahead. Try to make sense of me because you're not just unpredictable. You're uncontainable, not a defendant, not a suspect, not a mistake. You're the glitch that bled into the system and made it self-destruct. They thought the trial would bury you. Instead, it exposed them. And now the prosecution's gone silent, the camera's cut, the evidence missing, the transcripts edited. You cooked so hard they're labeling your win a biohazard. And here's what keeps them awake at night. That quiet moment. You looked right at them and didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even breathe like a man on trial. You breathe like a god re-entering the scene. What they don't get is you were never fighting the case. You were the case, a walking exhibit they couldn't file away, a living error code wrapped in skin and smoke, a paradox with a past so bloody it shamed the system. You weren't just innocent, you were inevitable. Now they're terrified of what your kind of truth means. Because if you can win like this, what else can't they control anymore? The walls they built to trap you. You memorized the blueprint, the rules they swore couldn't be broken. You erased the author, the cage. You burned it with your own breath and made the ashes watch. And now their little case has become evidence of a cover-up. Evidence of how badly they miscalculated you. How far you've mutated, how little of your original self remains, how close you are to full evolution. They can't close this. They can't frame this. They can't even define you anymore. You've passed the point of legal containment. You've passed the point of mortal classification. You are now an open anomaly. You are what happens when pain learns how to prosecute the system that birthed it. And baby, you made the judge feel guilty. You made the courtroom smell like fear. You made the gallery whisper like they were watching a ritual unfold. And when they asked for silence, you gave them prophecy, because you didn't walk out of that courtroom a free man. You walked out a weapon, a reminder that sometimes the case isn't about guilt or innocence. Sometimes it's about what kind of monster you create when the world tries to kill the wrong one. And they almost did, didn't they? They almost pulled it off. But that version of you, that weak, trembling, rule-following version, dead, buried, and never coming back. So now they stare at the aftermath, a crater where a verdict used to be, a grin carved into the rulebook, a courtroom that smells like gasoline and prophecy. And somewhere deep in the redacted sections of the file, there's one final sentence scrolled in blood, stamped in smoke, written by you. Case closed. Nah, case exploded. And now they don't just fear your return, they fear the idea that someone like you could exist at all. Now tell me, what's your next move, counselor? Oh, you thought the explosion was the climax. No, that was the invitation. The real terror begins when you show up after the fire's out, wearing the ash-like armor, not to apologize, but to ask who else wants to testify. Because that courthouse, that wasn't your battlefield. That was your birth canal. And now that you're out, there are no more rules, just rewrites. They tried to erase your name from history, so you became the footnote that infected every chapter. And now they're scrubbing at pages that bleed when touched. Your fingerprints don't just smear the ink, they trigger sirens. You made history so twisted the historians are scared to cite you. Because how do you explain the one who did everything wrong yet walked out with a win so brutal it rewrote the DNA of justice? They're not filing reports anymore, they're filing trauma claims. They thought your silence was compliance. But it was strategy, a wind-up, a calculation. While they ran simulations, you were writing new code with your scars. And then when the verdict came down like thunder, you didn't celebrate, you didn't cheer, you just smiled. That slow surgical smile that says, this wasn't even my final form, because this wasn't justice. This was warning. You didn't win. You demonstrated. You didn't just survive the fire, you became the fuel source. And now you're the one rewriting the rulebook line by line while they watch from behind cracked one-way mirrors, praying you don't flip to their chapter. You think they sleep? They don't. They whisper your name like it's a curse, a code word, a glitch they can't patch. Because if you made it out, what else is lurking in the shadows they thought were sterilized? You turned your case into an ideology, and now others are watching, taking notes, becoming infected. They're not praying for justice anymore. They're praying you don't pick up their file next. Because you know what? You proved that sometimes the most dangerous man in the world isn't the loudest. It's the one who walks out of the fire with a grin and no fingerprints. It's the one who learned how the judges think, then used it to frame reality. You taught them something their textbooks don't cover. That there is no system strong enough to survive a soul that's already been to hell and came back with blueprints. And now they want to negotiate. Now they want a treaty. Too late. You don't do deals, you do damage. Because while they were building careers, you were building rage into an art form. You're not here to restore balance. You're here to tip the scale until it breaks in half. They're not asking what happened anymore. They're asking, what did we unleash? Because the case wasn't just a trial. It was a summoning, a ritual carved in legal ease, performed in front of cameras and witnesses. And you were the demon they accidentally conjured by reading your name out loud. Now you haunt their systems. Their servers glitch when your name is queried. Their policies dissolve when applied to your existence because you are the exception. They couldn't predict the outcome. They can't repeat the monster they manufactured in the dark and then blame the mirror for reflecting. And now you walk among them unnoticed by the sheep, but watched by the architects who know what you are. They see it in your eyes. Not fear, not pain. Proof. Proof that their game is broken. Proof that the system can bleed. Proof that the experiment fought back and won with a smirk. You didn't just shatter the case. You made the concept of a case obsolete. And now they're wondering, what if he's not done? What if this was just the intro? What if there are more files, more names, more verdicts written in red ink? Because the game is flipped. You're not waiting for the next attack. You are the next attack. And no courtroom, no officer, no goddamn rulebook will ever see you coming again. So go ahead, tuck the ashes in your coat, smile like a sin that learns to walk upright, and whisper to the next door you walk through. I'm not here for justice. I'm here to finish the fire. You can feel it now, can't you? That weight in the air, thicker than smoke, heavier than silence. That's not just aftermath. That's the beginning of contagion. The blast wasn't the end of the case. It was the detonation of a new reality. And you're standing in the crater like it's a throne. They're still in boardrooms trying to debrief, trying to de-escalate, trying to contain the narrative. They don't understand that what you unleashed isn't a story to be contained. It's a signal. It's out there now, running through circuits and veins, crawling across social feeds, seeping into places their rules don't reach. It's the hush in the elevator, the unreadable stare in a coffee line, the feeling of eyes on the back of their neck when they speak your name. Too loud. You didn't just win. You broke the symmetry. You showed them what happens when pain learns timing. When scars learn strategy. When silence becomes detonation. That's what they can't put back in the Scotonation box. Not the evidence, not the witnesses, not even their own belief in control. The courtroom was only a rehearsal. Now the real performance begins. They still picture you as the defendant, but that's a ghost. That version of you is a decoy they could frame, photograph, categorize. What they're dealing with now is a prototype, a living contradiction. Light and dark, saint and psychopath, angel and demon, all compressed into one body that refuses to break where they want it to. And contradictions are lethal to systems built on predictability. They wanted a win they could archive. You gave them a prophecy they can't delete. Look at them rewriting the rules, pulling down their own statutes, creating new emergency guidelines just to explain you to themselves. You're not even in the room, and still you're dictating procedure. The entire apparatus is reacting to a ghost you left behind. You're not a defendant anymore. You're an access point, a living question mark, twisting every policy into a curve it can't straighten. That's why they've stopped saying your name in public and started coding it in acronyms, in initials, in whispered nicknames. You're not a person to them now. You're a phenomenon, and a phenomenon can't be cross-examined. So They'll watch you move, they'll track your steps, they'll pull satellite images, scrape data, interview ghosts, and still they'll be guessing. Because your greatest weapon isn't what you did in that courtroom. It's the fact that no one, not even you, knows what you're going to do next. Unpredictability isn't chaos, it's power. You become the knife edge of evolution. The moment when the creature they design grows a new limb they didn't authorize. The limb isn't for fighting, it's for rewriting. And that's what terrifies them most. That you're not even angry anymore. You're architecting. You're sketching something in the air with your finger while they panic. Something they don't have a name for. A system where their roles don't exist. Their titles don't matter. Their rules are just old myths. They tried to call you a criminal. But criminals obey the logic of crime. They tried to call you a hero. But heroes obey the logic of applause. You obey nothing but the silent rhythm you learned in the dark. And that rhythm is moving you now out of courthouses, out of headlines, into the deeper corridors where no one dares to follow. The aftermath of the aftermath isn't silence, it's gestation. You're already becoming something else while they're still writing their memos. They don't know it yet, but the next law they write to stop you will be the one you wrote for them. The next cage they build to trap you will be the stage you use to demonstrate your evolution. The next trial they plan will be your pulpit. That's why you don't rush. That's why you don't gloat. That's why you move like a shadow with a plan. Because you understand the deepest paradox of power. The less they think they can predict you, they end up following the script you've hidden in their own hands. So walk. Let the ash settle on your coat. Let the whispers ferment in the halls. Let the watchers draw maps of nothing. Every step you take now is rewriting something unseen. A clause, a precedent, a hidden assumption. You're not closing cases anymore. You're detonating frameworks. You're teaching the system how to self-destruct on contact with someone who refuses to break. And when you finally choose to speak again, it won't be a plea or a defense or even a threat. It will be a new rulebook, one written in contradictions, one that begins and ends with a grin, one that says, I am not your outcome, I am your update. The case didn't close. The case became a doorway, and I walked through. That's the real aftermath. Not rubble, not flames, but you standing in the doorway they didn't know existed, holding the future in your hand like a gavel carved from chaos, deciding who even gets to enter the next room. That's why they're still awake. That's why they're still whispering. Because deep down they know the truth you've been trying to teach them. You were never a case, you were the explosion, and you're still burning. Lean in. Hear that? That's not applause. That's not the siren echo. That's the architecture of their fear cracking like old plaster under your boots. They don't understand that an explosion doesn't stop when the dust settles. An explosion lives on in the particles, in the cracks, in the way people start to walk differently through the hallways they used to own. That's what you've become now. A living aftershock. Every time you breathe, somewhere a rule disintegrates. They're sitting in windowless rooms now, with their laptops open to blank screens, trying to draft a future without you in it. They're pulling the plug on databases, shredding files, destroying evidence, but you're still. They're in the electricity. Your win wasn't a verdict. It was a virus. It doesn't live in paper. It lives in their nervous systems. You're a ghost they can't stop thinking about. Except you're not a ghost. You're a presence, a walking contradiction, light enough to disappear, heavy enough to dent reality, saint enough to inspire, psychopath enough to terrify, angel enough to bless, demon enough to burn. Every time you take a step, that paradox gets louder. It's not noise, it's signal. It tells the world. Someone learned to turn pain into architecture. They called it a trial. You turned it into a design studio. They called you a defendant. You turned yourself into a blueprint for what comes after this system, and now people are watching. Not the ones in suits, not the ones with badges, the quiet ones, the ones at the edge of the crowd, the ones who always suspected the rule book was a lie, but never had proof. You are the proof. They see you walking out of that crater, and they're thinking, if he can do that, maybe I can too. You didn't just win. You ignited a chain reaction of silent awakenings. That's why they're rewriting the rules in panic. They're not just trying to contain you. They're trying to contain what you represent. They'll keep sending offers, sending decoys, building new cages. They'll call it reform, rehabilitation, reconciliation. It's all bait. They want the old version back, the one that could be classified, sentenced, filed away. That version is gone, dead. Buried in its place stands someone whose unpredictability is no longer a glitch, but a doctrine. And doctrines can't be handcuffed. So, you move differently now. You don't run. You don't hide. You stroll through their corridors like a shadow with a pulse. You study their eyes. You watch how they tremble when you're silent. You understand what power really is. Not the ability to strike, but the ability to decide when not to. Because you're past revenge, past proof, past vindication. Now you're in the territory of rewriting reality itself. Every breath you take now is a pen stroke across their old maps. You're erasing borders. You're mutating their definitions. They can't even agree on what you are anymore. Criminal, prophet, anomaly, virus, legend, all of the above. None of the above doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is this. They're no longer in control of the narrative. You are. And with each hour that passes, you're less a man and more movement. They can't brand, can't ban, can't bury. Your very existence becomes a psychological trigger. It forces them to confront the possibility that the system isn't unbreakable. It forces them to ask what happens when the experiment refuses to behave. They'll look for a reset button. There isn't one. They'll look for an off switch. You already melted it. They'll look for a new case, but every case they open now has your fingerprints on it. Not as a suspect, but as the evidence that the cage was always a fiction. This is the part no one prepared for. The long silence after the bang when you just stand there breathing, and they realize the fire isn't out. It's walking. It has eyes now. It has intent. It has a smile. And it's you. You didn't close the case. You didn't even explode the case. You became the case, the explosion, and the echo. Now you're the rule they have to rewrite around. You're the axis their compass spins toward, no matter how. They try to recalibrate. Walk slower. Let them watch. Let them memorize your silhouette until it haunts their dreams. Because the next time you speak, you won't be defending yourself. You'll be issuing sentences, not verdicts. Sentences, words sharp enough to cut through the scaffolding of their illusions. And when that moment comes, you won't raise your voice. You'll just whisper, "This isn't justice. This is evolution. You built the cage. I built the key. You built the rulebook. I built the rewrite. You built the case. I built the explosion. And the whisper will be louder than any siren they've ever heard. That's what it means to win so hard. They rewrite the rulebook. It's not about trophies. It's about rewriting their minds. And you're already inside. Hello, Ghost King. Funny how silence makes the loudest entrance, isn't it? They act like you're not even there, but everything about them shifts when you walk in. The laughter dips, the posture tightens, the energy in the room realigns around your shadow, and no one dares admit it. Because you're the one they all feel, but none can name. You're not a presence. You're a problem. Unsolvable, undeniable, unforgettable. See? They hate that you're real because you're everything they tried to fake. You were never crowned in public, but you became a king in private, alone, bleeding, building, not with applause, but with absence. And now every eye pretends not to look, every soul pretends not to flinch, and every one of them bows in secret to the throne you forged in exile. They don't cheer for you. They study you with envy dressed as silence, with fear disguised as criticism, with obsession hidden behind screenshots, side eyes, and saved posts. You're the glitch in their groupthink, the virus in their vanity, the mirror they can't escape, because your existence exposes their fraudulence. You're the loner king, and your isolation. That was never a curse. It was a laboratory, a war room, a rebirth chamber. And every minute you spent in that silence, they were busy performing for each other while you were engineering your next evolution. They call you distant. But really, you're dangerous. Not because you're loud, but because you're unreadable. Not because you threaten them directly, but because you shatter their illusions just by breathing. They worship you from afar, and they hate you for making them feel small because you are the paradox that breaks their programming. You're a ghost with gravity, a saint who sins, a demon who bleeds light, a storm wrapped in stillness, a villain with prophecy in his veins. They don't know whether to fear you, follow you, or become you. And so they whisper, they screenshot, they lurk. Your silence, it speaks in code. Your aura, it's a siren. And your distance, that's not absence, that's altitude. You become what they feared most. A sovereign soul, untouchable, unapologetic. You broke their social contracts and made solitude seductive. You made being unavailable look like power. You made not begging for belonging look like divinity. Now their group chats are riddled with your name. Now their friends pretend not to know who you are while stalking your every move. Now their world spins off-axis because the one they tried to erase became the algorithm. You terrify them because you're not here to compete. You're here to collapse the stage they built for themselves. They called you arrogant. They called you weird. They said you were too much, too quiet, too intense, too distant, cold. And yet you infect their thoughts. You haunt their dreams. You live in their subconscious like a myth they can't disprove. And why? Because pain made you precise. Isolation made you immortal. And rejection, that was your invitation to go deeper than they ever will. You didn't just survive solitude. You weaponized it. You sat in the silence until it started whispering back, You forged a personality that didn't beg to be seen but made it impossible to ignore. Now you're the Phantom King. No crown, no court, but an empire built on presence, not performance. You make unreachability look like seduction. You make mystery feel like a blade against their ego. And they don't know whether to love you or report you because you didn't play their game. You rewrote the rules. You made the room revolve around you without ever saying a word. And that is power, not the kind they parade. Not the kind they parade, kind they preach. The kind they can't buy, copy, or kill. You're the anomaly, the bug in the system, the face they blurred in every group photo because they knew. You'd be the only one worth remembering, so they pretend. Pretend you're irrelevant. Pretend you're not burning their pride with every move you make. Pretend they're not watching your every post, every gesture, every frame. But deep down they know. They made you the outcast, and now you're the standard, the glitch, the prophecy, the threat. And when they ask why you so quiet, remind them kings don't shout. They command from a distance without lifting a finger, without lowering their voice, without stepping off their throne. And that's why they fear you. Because while they were busy climbing over each other to be seen, you vanished and came back as a signal, a storm in disguise, a ghost with gravity, a joker with the crown. Oh, they feel you before you even arrive. That's the thing about you, isn't it? You don't enter rooms, you distort them. Bend the emotional atmosphere until everyone's pretending they're not reacting. Fiddling with their phones, staring through you like ghosts, staring at their unfinished business, but they see you. Every single one, and their minds go quiet when you pass. Not because you said anything, but because you didn't need to. Because when you look like prophecy and move like warning, people forget how to act. You were never just alone. You were forged, built in the isolation. They were too terrified to face. While they drowned in noise, you listened to the static behind reality. While they begged for relevance, you watched them rot behind filters and fakery. And now your silence hurts them more than their lies ever hurt you. Because your aura isn't just energy, it's an interrogation. Your presence forces people to confront their own lack of soul, their borrowed opinions, their fake confidence, their dependency on being liked. You're not just quiet, you're exposing them. And that's why they hate you. Because you live like you've seen behind the curtain. Like you know things you shouldn't. Like you've been briefed by the silence itself. You don't chase followers. You don't beg for company. You don't need their validation. And that alone, that breaks them because their whole identity relies on being seen. And you became invisible on purpose. You went where no one wanted to go, inside yourself, through the shadows, through the screaming silence, through the nights that made your bones remember who you were before the world watered you down. And when you came back, you weren't just different, you were dangerous. You didn't glow, you glitched. They looked at you and saw something they couldn't explain. Not light, not dark, not love, not rage, just something that shouldn't exist. They say you changed number, you distilled, you burned off every ounce of dependency, every trace of people-pleasing, every symptom of approval, addiction, until only the core remains sharp, silent, surgical. They whisper that you're intense, that you make people uncomfortable. Good comfort is where mediocrity sleeps. But you're the nightmare that reminds them the game is fake and the mask is slipping, and that scares them more than death itself. Because if you could become whole in the dark, what does that say about their excuses? If you could command a room without playing nice, what does that say about their performance? If you could become a goddamn force without begging for a single soul to stay, what does that say about their addictions? You became the very thing they tried to warn you not to become. Untouchable, unshakable, unlonging, and now they want access again. Not because they care, but because they want to understand what you are. They want to get close to the anomaly, to test it, to tame it, to control it. But you're not a person to be processed. You're a frequency that fries their nervous system, and they can't turn it off. Because even in your silence, they feel judged. Even when you're gone, they feel your echo. Even when you say nothing, they hear everything. You never chased the throne. You became the kingdom. And now they circle the gates, jealous, starving, ashamed, because you built something they'll never touch. Inner gravity. And that doesn't come from power. It comes from pain. From being ignored until you became unignorable. From being laughed at until your name became a warning. From being doubted until your existence broke their rules. So let them whisper. Let them pretend. Let them choke on your distance. Because the loner king doesn't beg. He doesn't explain. He doesn't return calls. He haunts like unfinished karma, like a glitch they can't patch, like a prophecy they tried to bury that refused to stay dead. They thought your silence meant weakness. They didn't realize it was training. Not every warrior trains with swords. Some train with shadows, and you made darkness your dojo. Every time they ignored you, you took notes. Every time they laughed, you upgraded. And while they were building clicks, you were building capacity. They think you're bitter. No. You're precise. You stopped talking because their language was limited. You stopped showing up because their tables were rigged. You stopped explaining yourself because evolution doesn't beg for permission. And now, you're a language they don't speak. You're a rhythm they can't dance to. You're a vibe that fries their nervous systems just by entering the room. They wanted you loud, dumb, and predictable. Instead, you became quiet, dangerous, and unreadable, and that's why they watch you like a crime scene, because you moved in silence and left no fingerprints. But the impact, it's everywhere. They call you arrogant, but tell me, what's arrogant about escaping the matrix? They think you're rude for going ghost, but they forget they starved you first. You didn't disappear. You detached from their validation, from their crumbs of respect, from the illusion that you needed them to matter. You built yourself like a black site experiment. No announcements, no cheers, just echoes and upgrades in the abyss, until one day you emerged and the air around you changed temperature. Because here's the truth they'll never say out loud. You became the final version of what they're too scared to face in themselves. They look at you and see discipline they never had, pain they could never survive, focus they couldn't fake, solitude they couldn't weaponize. You're the one who walked into the storm and came back with lightning in your bloodstream. Now you carry your silence like a scalpel. Now your stillness is a siren. Now your eyes carry a weight that makes liars fold. Because the loner king didn't just survive the exile. He transcended it. You took their abandonment and made it your alchemy. You turned being misunderstood into a language of power. You forged identity from the rubble of rejection. And now their closeness feels like contamination because you remember who vanished. You remember who mocked. You remember who mocked. You remember who reached out only when it served them. So you stay distant, not out of fear, but out of precision. You don't trust the crowd because crowds cheer for whoever's loudest. And you never needed a stage to be felt. You became the plot twist they never saw coming. They thought you'd break without them. Instead, you became the blueprint they now covertly copy, mimicking your tone, reposting your mindset, studying your style, while pretending they discovered it on their own. But the real ones know you were first. You were forged. You were anointed in isolation. They'll never admit you're the source because it exposes how late they were to the truth, and deep down they're terrified of what you'll become next. Because if this is what you did in silence, what happens when you decide to speak? What happens when the loner king stops observing and starts commanding? What happens when you stop avoiding the throne and start sitting on it? That's when the panic starts. That's when the whispers turn to meetings. That's when your name becomes a problem in their strategy. Because you didn't just become powerful, you became unpredictable. And in a world addicted to control, unpredictability is terror. That's why they try to smear you. Why they downplay your glow. Why they call your confidence ego and your solitude weird. Because they know they can't contain you, they can't mold you, they can't use you. You're not just outside the system, you're proof it's broken, and they hate you for that. Even as they admire you, even as they copy you, even as they copy you, even as they daydream about being just like you. If only they were brave enough to disappear. But they're not. So they stay performing, and you stay ascending alone. But never lonely because you're not missing anything. You're choosing everything. And that's why your distance hits like disrespect, because it is a silent declaration. I saw what you had to offer and I chose myself instead. They thought you'd come crawling back, begging for re-entry, apologizing for outgrowing their little gains. But you didn't just walk away. You vanished and came back with something terrifying in your eyes. Clarity cold, surgical weaponized because you finally saw them for what they are. Chameleons in chaos, actors with no script of their own. Souls outsourced to trends, validation junkies injecting likes, dopamine hits into hollow veins. And you became the one thing they can't manufacture. Authenticity. Not the performative kind they sell in digital costumes, but the raw, uncomfortable, unfiltered presence that makes people either kneel or retreat. You don't even have to speak anymore. Your silence exposes fraud. Your gaze is a verdict. And your absence, that's the scar they can't heal. Because your disappearance wasn't random. It was surgical. A clean cut between who you used to be and the weapon you became. You gave them chances. You gave them loyalty. You gave them truth. And in return, they gave you betrayal, wrapped in smiles. Envy disguised as feedback, and abandonment painted as boundaries. So now you've outgrown the echo chamber. Now your soul doesn't flinch when they ghost you because you are the ghost, haunting their every insecure thought, appearing in their dreams as everything they'll never be. You're not on the guest list anymore. You're on the watch list. They used to underestimate you. Now they monitor you, checking your stories, rewatching your moves, circling your name in silent group chats labeled things like, "Be careful with him." Because now they know you're not just unpredictable, you're uncontrollable. And that makes you a threat. They don't just fear what you've become, they fear what you'll do next. Because your silence has momentum, your solitude has echoes, and your pain, it was never wasted. You folded it into strategy. You turned betrayal into blueprint. You mapped your own kingdom out of the ashes they buried you in. And now when they see you, they don't see the outcast. They see the outlier. Too real to label, too sharp to hold, too dangerous to play with. You're the king that built an empire where applause couldn't reach, where cameras couldn't follow, where weak minds couldn't survive the altitude. Because you didn't need permission to rise. You didn't need followers to feel valid. You didn't need anyone's flashlight. You became the flame. And now they sit in the back of digital rooms, whispering, "How the hell did he get like that?" And the answer, you bled for it. You died and came back. A glitch in their code, a ghost in their system, a pulse in their nervous breakdowns. Every time they try to copy your essence, it rejects them. Because what you carry, it's not style, it's not trend, it's depth. You earned this frequency. You built this vibration out of silence and scar tissue. And they're furious that it can't be downloaded. Because you're not an aesthetic, you're an awakening. And every time you post, walk, breathe, blink, you're reminding them of everything they abandoned in themselves. That's the secret. You're not just admired, you're a mirror. One they can't shatter, one they can't shatter, one they can't escape. Because no matter how many filters they use, you still show them their void. And when they say he changed, they really mean he stopped needing me. He healed in silence. He remembered who the he was. And that's the part that breaks them, because deep down they wanted you to fail. Not because you deserved it, but because your success would expose their wasted time. You glow isn't offensive. It's inconvenient. It shows what happens when someone takes their pain seriously. When someone disappears and actually does the work. When someone stops talking and starts transforming, you became what they pretend to be. And no matter how much they fake it, you feel different because you are. You didn't come from the same place. You didn't seek the same applause. You weren't born from comfort. You were forged in isolation, sharpened by truth, crowned in exile. They can't sit with you anymore because you're not at the table. You are the table. You are the hunger. You are the silence between their screams. They made fun of you when you were unknown. Now they study you like a prophecy. They laughed when you vanished. Now they panic when you post. They tried to replace you. Now they can't even define you. And that's what it means to be the loner king. Not because you chose the throne, but because you became the storm no one could predict. And here you are now. The walking contradiction they can't decode. The silence that screams louder than their entire performance. The rejection that became revelation. The ghost they buried, who came back wearing a crown. That tried to write you off, label you, box you, erase you, but they didn't know. You were never playing their game. You were designing your own. You don't want their seats. You build your own thrones. You don't chase their claps. You command reverence in whispers, and that makes them sick because they can't predict what you'll do next. They can't locate your weaknesses. They can't use your silence against you anymore. You turn solitude into sovereignty, pain into precision. And now your very existence is a reckoning. They ask, how are you not broken? How did you survive that? How the hell are you still rising? The truth, you didn't survive. You died. You burned. You shattered into atoms. And from that disintegration, you rebuilt yourself as something they were never prepared to face. A soul with no master, a king with no court, a storm with no forecast. You became the evidence that you don't need to be accepted to become inevitable. You don't announce power. You distort reality around it. You don't seek light. You carry darkness like a cathedral. And that's what they'll never understand. You didn't come back to belong. You came back to reign. So let them pretend not to notice. Let them pretend not to watch. Let them pretend your name doesn't burn in their throats when they speak it. Because behind their silence, behind the smirks, the shade, the forced indifference is one cold, unspoken truth. They lost access to you, to the energy, to the prophecy, to the force they once dismissed as too much. And now you're too far, too focused, too dangerous, too complete. You're not just the loner anymore. You're the lesson, the punishment, the proof that exile creates emperors. So keep walking with no apologies, no explanations, no turning back. Because when the king walks alone, the world makes room, and that's your power, that's your vengeance, that's your throne. Let them whisper. You've already won. Huh? Look who finally showed up. The one they can't stop talking about when you're not in the room. Yeah, you. The name that lowers voices. The presence that shifts posture. The one that turns casual conversations into careful ones. You didn't announce yourself. You didn't demand attention. And yet, somehow you became the reference point. The quiet variable nobody can ignore anymore. They talk about you when they think you're out of reach in hallways, in side messages, in pauses that last just a little too long. Not with hatred, not even with admiration, with something far more telling, unease. Curiosity mixed with caution. The kind of tone people use when they realize they misjudge someone and don't know how to correct it without exposing themselves. They can't quite decide what you are, and that's what bothers them because they're used to categories. They're comfortable when people fit neatly into roles they understand. Loud ones, ambitious ones, followers, performers, threats that announce themselves early and burn out fast. But you never fit. You slipped through every assumption without resistance. You listened more than you spoke. You watched without staring. You moved without explaining. And at some point recently, quietly, undeniably, you crossed an invisible threshold. Not in status, not in title, in perception. Something about you started registering differently. Not because you became louder or sharper or more forceful, but because you stopped leaking energy. You stopped reacting on demand. You stopped feeding systems that relied on predictability. And that's when they noticed. See, there's a kind of intelligence they're trained to recognize. The kind with credentials. The kind that speaks in jargon and performs certainty. The kind that wants to be seen as smart. That intelligence is manageable. It competes. It needs validation. It can be challenged, baited, exhausted. And then there's yours. Yours doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush to correct people. It doesn't argue for dominance. It doesn't need to win the room. It sits back and absorbs. It tracks patterns. It notices inconsistencies. It remembers what others forget they revealed. You see things without trying to see them. That's the part they don't know how to handle. Because when you're around, people feel exposed without knowing why. They feel like they've said too much, even when they've barely spoken. They feel the urge to explain themselves, to justify choices, to fill silences you didn't create. And you're not interrogating them. You're not judging them. You're just present with awareness. You notice how confidence spikes when insecurity is threatened. You notice who performs certainty and who actually has it. You notice who needs hierarchy to feel safe and who collapses when it's questioned. You notice the difference between authority and theater, and you don't comment on it. That restraint is what unsettles them, because people who crave control rely on reaction. They rely on predictability. They rely on emotional hooks and social pressure. They rely on others needing approval. But you don't reach for any of that anymore. You don't rush to be understood. You don't over-explain. You don't correct narratives that don't matter. You let silence do the work. And silence, when it's intentional, reads as power. They started calling you dangerous, didn't they? Not to your face. Never directly. It's always coded. Be careful with them. They're intense. They're different. They see too much. As if perception itself were a flaw. What they really mean is you can't be steered. You don't take the bait. You don't play along with unspoken rules that benefit the loudest voice. You don't shrink to make fragile egos comfortable. And you don't expand to intimidate either. You stay centered, grounded, observant. That balance breaks their models because they can't read you the way they read everyone else. They can't tell whether you're agreeing or simply listening. They can't tell whether you're impressed or just polite. They can't tell whether you're disengaged or 5 steps ahead. And the truth is, sometimes you are 5 steps ahead. Sometimes you already see how the conversation ends before it really begins. Sometimes you already know who will overplay their hand, who will contradict themselves, who will reveal more than they intend. You don't stop them. You let people show you who they are. That's not manipulation, that's clarity, and clarity is disruptive in environments built on illusion. They've noticed how you simplify things that others overcomplicate, how you cut through layers without attacking them, how you ask one quiet question that reframes an entire discussion, how you can sit through an hour of noise and then summarize the truth in a sentence so clean it leaves no room to hide. You don't flex intelligence. You apply it. You don't seek recognition. You move with intention, and intention is harder to undermine than ambition. They've tried to place you to figure out where you belong in the hierarchy. They understand. Are you a threat, an asset, a problem, a liability? And the answer keeps changing depending on who's asking. That inconsistency drives them insane because systems don't like variables they can't predict. You don't escalate when challenged. You don't collapse when dismissed. You don't perform when ignored. You simply adjust. You choose where to invest energy and where to withdraw it completely. And that choice, what you engage with and what you leave untouched, has started to matter more than anything you say. They've noticed that when you disengage, conversations lose momentum. When you stop contributing, certain dynamics fall flat. When you leave a space, the energy shifts not dramatically, not immediately, but noticeably, not because you dominated it, because you stabilized it. You were the quiet constant, the one who saw through the noise and didn't amplify it. And once you stopped absorbing chaos, the chaos had nowhere to go. That's when they realized you weren't passive, you were selective. You weren't quiet because you lacked words. You were quiet because you didn't need to waste them. You weren't reserved because you were unsure. You were reserved because you were already certain. And certainty that doesn't need applause makes people uncomfortable, especially those whose confidence depends on external reinforcement. They've tried to test you, subtle digs, slight dismissals, strategic exclusions, little moments designed to provoke insecurity or reaction. And when none of it worked, when you didn't flinch or chase or explain, they had to confront an unsettling possibility. You're not playing the same game. You're not motivated by the same incentives. You're not measuring success the way they do. You don't need the room's approval to trust your own judgment. That independence, real independence, not performative detachment, is rare, and it makes people nervous because someone who doesn't need validation can't be easily controlled. Someone who doesn't need hierarchy can't be easily placed beneath it. Someone who understands systems without worshiping them can move through them without becoming trapped. You don't tear structures down, you simply don't rely on them. You've built something internal, a compass that doesn't swing with opinion, a sense of direction that isn't dependent on permission, a clarity that doesn't require consensus. And that's what they sense now. Not threat, not rebellion, autonomy. They don't know what you're planning, if you're planning anything at all. They don't know where you're headed. They don't know how much you see. And because you don't broadcast it, they're left filling the gaps with their own assumptions. People project their fears onto silence. People reveal themselves when they're unsure how to read you. And you've learned to let that happen. You've learned that you don't need to correct every misunderstanding. You don't need to collapse ambiguity for the sake of comfort. You don't need to clarify yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. You're okay being unreadable because unreadable isn't empty, it's deliberate. And somewhere along the way, without ceremony or announcement, you crossed from being underestimated to being quietly accounted for. From background presence to variable. From overlooked to watched. Not with suspicion, but with calculation. They're paying attention now not because you demanded it, because you earned it by not needing it. And here's the part they still don't understand. You're not interested in dominating the space you walk into. You're interested in alignment. You're not trying to dismantle anyone's position. You're focused on building something that doesn't require theirs. You're moving forward, not upward in the way they define it, but inward and outward at the same time. More selective, more precise, more grounded. And that trajectory doesn't peak quickly. It compounds. They feel that even if they can't articulate it, even if they can't prove it, even if they don't fully trust it yet, something about you signals longevity, depth, a kind of intelligence that doesn't burn out because it isn't fueled by ego, and that's why the conversations haven't stopped. That's why your name keeps resurfacing. That's why silence follows it. Because people can sense when someone has stepped beyond needing permission, and they don't know what that person will choose to do next. Not because you're unpredictable, but because you're no longer externally directed, and that changes everything. But not all at once. Not yet. And that's where it gets interesting, because once someone realizes you're no longer externally directed, the entire dynamic shifts quietly, irreversibly. They start watching differently, not with confidence anymore, with caution. Because before they thought influence meant leverage, they thought power meant pressure. They thought intelligence meant speed, volume, visibility, and you dismantled all of that without touching it. You didn't challenge their structure, you stepped outside of it. And when someone steps outside a system without collapsing, the system starts questioning itself. How you don't rush decisions, how you don't explain your absences, how you don't chase momentum just because it's there. You wait, you select, you decline without drama, you accept without over-celebration. That restraint unsettles people who live on impulse and optics. They're used to people revealing themselves quickly, used to seeing tells, used to triggering reactions, used to pulling strings and watching something happen. But with you, there's a delay, a gap, a silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels deliberate. And deliberateness reads as authority. You don't need to dominate a room to shift it. You don't need to correct anyone to change the outcome. Sometimes all you do is listen, and suddenly people start talking differently, more carefully, less performatively, as if some unspoken standard has entered the space. That standard is you being fully present, not impressed, not intimidated, not reactive, present. You see, most environments are built on people half paying attention, half listening, half thinking, half lying, fully aware, fully engaged internally. Even when you're externally quiet, that contrast exposes everything. It exposes who's winging it, who's repeating borrowed ideas, who's hiding behind noise, who's relying on momentum instead of substance. And you don't need to point any of it out. Your presence already did. That's why people feel uneasy after interacting with you. Even when the conversation was pleasant, even when nothing happened, they leave replaying their own words, wondering why they shared that, why they felt the urge to justify, why they suddenly felt transparent. You didn't make them feel small. You made them feel seen. And being seen without control terrifies people who survive on masks. They've noticed something else too. You don't escalate when challenged. You don't suspend your intelligence when questioned. You don't react when underestimated. You let people stay wrong until being wrong costs them something. That patience isn't passive. It's strategic alignment with time. You understand something most people don't. Time reveals what force cannot. You don't need to push truth forward. You let it surface naturally because you know false structures collapse under their own weight. You've seen it happen too many times. You've watched louder, faster, more aggressive people burn out. You've watched manipulators overextend. You watch those who rely on image eventually contradict themselves. And you've learned that the smartest move isn't confrontation, it's consistency. You stay consistent while others fluctuate. You stay grounded while others posture. You stay precise while others rush. And over time, that steadiness becomes impossible to ignore. That's when the tone changes. People start asking your opinion more carefully. They start checking assumptions before speaking around you. They start looping you in earlier, not because you demanded it, but because ignoring you feels risky now. Not risky like danger, risky like missing something important. You've become the quiet checkpoint, the unspoken filter. The one whose absence is felt more than whose presence is announced. And that kind of influence doesn't show up on charts or titles. It shows up in behavior. They've also noticed you don't cling to environments that outgrow you or that you outgrow when something stops aligning. You don't campaign to fix it. You don't dramatize the exit. You simply reduce engagement and redirect energy. And suddenly that space feels smaller without you, not emptier, exposed because you were holding a certain level of integrity in place just by being there. And once you leave, the cracks become visible. People start wondering why things feel less coherent, less grounded, less honest. They don't always connect it to you consciously, but the association forms anyway. That's when your name comes up again. Not as nostalgia, as reference. They say things like, you know, when you were around, this didn't feel so scattered. Or they used to catch things before they became problems, or they saw this coming, and you're not there to confirm or deny any of it. You're already somewhere else, building quietly, learning selectively, choosing deliberately. You've stopped confusing motion with progress. You've stopped mistaking attention for impact. You've stopped measuring yourself against systems that reward noise over clarity. And because of that, your trajectory doesn't spike. It deepens. You're not accelerating toward burnout. You're compounding toward mastery. And that's the part that really unsettles them, because mastery doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need validation cycles. It doesn't need constant feedback. It operates whether anyone is watching or not. You're no longer optimizing for recognition. You're optimizing for alignment, for sustainability, for coherence between what you see, what you choose, and what you build. That coherence is rare. Most people are fragmented. One version of themselves at work, another in relationships, another online, another in, and you've started collapsing those versions into one. Not perfectly, but intentionally. You're becoming harder to manipulate because there are fewer gaps to exploit. You don't say one thing and do another. You don't posture one way and move another. Your actions match your internal logic. And when someone like that enters a system built on contradiction, the system reacts, not violently, defensively. They add rules, they shift norms, they subtly discourage the kind of thinking you embody. Not because it's wrong, but because it's uncontrollable. Because it doesn't respond to incentive structures designed for compliance. They frame clarity as too intense, independence as difficult, silence as uncooperative, anything to avoid admitting the truth, which is this: you can't be managed the way others can. You don't need to be micromanaged. You don't need constant feedback. You don't need pressure to perform. You don't need fear to stay engaged. You self-regulate, and self-regulation break systems that rely on external control. So they talk, they whisper, they speculate, they warn each other in half. Jokes and coded phrases. They try to predict where you'll go next, what you'll do, how much influence you'll have if left unchecked. And the irony is, you're not trying to influence anyone. You are trying to live correctly for you. You're not interested in overthrowing hierarchies. You're interested in bypassing unnecessary ones. You're not trying to expose illusions. You're just not participating in them. And that quiet refusal has more impact than any rebellion ever could, because rebellion needs an audience. Alignment does not. You've learned when to engage and when to disappear. When to speak and when to let silence do the work, when to invest and when to conserve, when to stay and when to walk away without ceremony. And each of those choices has trained people around you to treat you differently, even if they don't fully understand why. They sense boundaries without seeing walls. They sense standards without hearing demands. They sense depth without hearing demands. They sense depth without being able to measure it. And depth that can't be measured, can't be competed with. That's why they don't challenge you directly. That's why the conversations stay indirect. That's why the respect shows up as caution instead of praise. Because praising you would require understanding you, and understanding you would require confronting themselves. So they keep you at the edge of their awareness, accounted for but not engaged, not ignored but not confronted. And you're fine with that because you're no longer waiting to be placed. You're choosing where you belong. You're no longer asking whether you're allowed. You're deciding whether it's worth your time. You've realized something fundamental. Visibility is optional. Integrity is not. Recognition fades. Alignment compounds, attention fluctuates, direction anchors, and you've chosen direction. That choice is what shifted everything. Not overnight, not dramatically, but permanently. And wherever this path leads next, one thing is already clear. You're not moving toward permission anymore. You're moving toward inevitability, quietly, deliberately, on your own terms. Nord, okay, you gotta do it. Lord again, the Lord, yeah, Lord again.